So now we have to graph this equation. And again, it's going to be a parabola because we have an x squared. And we have to graph it in a viewing window which displays the vertex, so the high or low point, and the points where the parabola intersects both the x and y axis. So the first thing we want to do, we want to press the y equals button, and we want to clear out the last equation and enter in this equation. And make sure when you enter in this negative sign in front of the 2x squared, you use the negative sign that's underneath the number 3 and not the subtraction sign. So I want you to enter the equation in, and I want to graph in the standard viewing window. So I want to then press zoom and then 6 and see if that is good enough to answer the question. The question says we want to see the vertex and the points where the parabola intersects both the x and y axis. And when you go to zoom 6, this is what your picture should look like. We see the point where it crosses the y-axis. We see the point where it crosses the x-axis, but we don't see the vertex of the parabola, which looks like it's a little bit off the screen up top. So what we want to do is we want to press window, and we're going to want to adjust the y max. Remember the screen. The top portion of the screen is y max. The bottom portion of the screen is y min. The left is x min. The right is x max. So since the point that we need to find is up top, we want to adjust the y max value. So let's change the y max to 20. Press then the graph button and see if that fixed the problem. It's very, very close, but the vertex is still slightly off the screen. So we have to go back and change the y max to a number that's bigger than 20. So I'm going to change my y max to 25. And I think now that we change the y max to 25 and then press graph, this is what the calculator should look like. So now we have the points where it crosses the x-axis, the point where it crosses the y-axis, and now we have the vertex. So I'll write my viewing window in from -10 to 10 for the x-axis, -10 to 25 on the y-axis, and in the box, normally if this was a homework assignment, you would put the picture, but here, on a test or quiz, you would have to draw your diagram in. So that's what my diagram looks like. And honestly, the numbers that you write are much more important than the artwork, but you're going to be required on tests and quizzes to draw your picture. Okay, now we have some questions. Number 2, what is the value of y when x is 2? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press second and window for table set. I'm going to start my table at 0, and I'm going to make my triangle table, my delta table 1, so my table goes up by 1s. So second window, set up your table this way, and then go second and graph to view the table. So for the first part, find the value of y when x is 2. Well, when x is 2, y is -25. Now we have to find the value of y when x is 3.5. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my table set. I'll go second and then window. And now I'll start my table at 3, and I'll change my delta table to 0.5. So now my table will start at 3 and go up by a half, or 0.5. Now I'll go second and graph for table. And when I do that, here the value of y when x is 3.5, negative 58. For part 4, now I have to find the values of x when y is negative 233. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the y column for negative 233. And it says values, so there's going to be 2 values because it's a parabola. And if you notice, I'm up to 8 and y is negative 211. If I keep pressing down using the down arrow button, here I see y is negative 233, x is 8.5. So one of the values of x when y is negative 233 is 8.5. Now I'm going to press up because the numbers are getting smaller again, but I have to make sure that my cursor is in the x column before I press up. And I kept pressing up until I see again y is negative 233 when x is negative 14. So the 2 values of x when y is negative 233 are 8.5 and negative 14. Now these next 2 questions, find the y-intercept, find the x-intercept, these are going to be questions that you want to highlight, circle, star in your notes because you're going to have to do this for all the equations. We basically want to find the coordinates of the points where it crosses the y-axis and where it crosses the x-axis. So we have our x-intercepts, there's 2 of them, and we have the y-intercept, there's 1 of them, and there's always going to be 1 y-intercept. Well, I'm going to start with the y-intercepts first. The way you find the coordinates of the y-intercept is you go to your table and you set x equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my table setup. So go to second, and then window for table set. Start your table at 0 and make your triangle table 1, so that way it goes up by 1s. And then go to second and graph for table. And here, the coordinates for the y-intercept are 0, 5. So what you do to find the y-intercept is you go to your table, start your table at 0, and you give the point. So here the value of x is 0, and it's always going to be 0 for the y-intercept, x is 0. And here the y value of when x is 0 is 5. So you would write on this line above, what is the y-intercept? It's the point 0, 5. The y-intercept and x-intercepts are always points. They're always coordinates. Now for this last part, you have to find the x-intercepts. You have to find the points where the graph crosses the x-axis. And if you look at your graph, it crosses the x-axis. Remember, this horizontal axis is the x-axis, and this graph crosses the x-axis twice. Now, the x-intercepts in math are called the zeros. So I could ask you to find the x-intercepts, I could ask you to find the zeros, and it means the same thing. Now what you have to do on your calculator is you have to press the second button, which is that blue button, and then you have to go to trace where it says above it, calculate. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to option 2, which says 0. So the way you find the x-intercepts is you press the second button and then trace for calculate, and then you go to option 2 for 0. Now what's going to happen is this. The way your calculator is set up is you have to go through a process twice. To find this x-intercept, you have to tell your calculator, look in between here and here for where it crosses the x-axis. You have to give your calculator a range where it has to look. It can't just calculate the x-intercepts for you automatically. So what you're going to do is you're going to tell your calculator, look in between here and here. You're going to give your calculator what they call a left bound and a right bound. You're going to tell your calculator, look in between these two places, look in between, and find where it crosses the x-axis. So using your arrow buttons, what you're going to do is you're going to find your cursor, and you're going to first, when it says left bound, move your cursor along the graph to any place to the left of where it crosses the x-axis. So use your left arrow button, hold it down until your cursor gets past where it crosses the x-axis. So I used my left arrow button and I moved the cursor to here. So now your calculator is going to start looking here. That's the left bound. When you move your cursor to the left of where it crosses the x-axis, press enter. Now your calculator is going to ask for a right bound. So now what you're going to do, using the right arrow button, move your cursor past where it crosses the x-axis. It crosses the x-axis about there. Move your cursor to about here so that it has a range in which to look. So you see how I moved my cursor up to here? I pressed enter. So now my calculator is going to look in between the left bound and the right bound for the point where it hits the x-axis. You see my calculator says guess. Now you're going to move the cursor back to about where it crosses the x-axis, to about down there. So I use my left arrow button to move the cursor back to about here where it crosses the x-axis, and then press enter for guess, and then your calculator will tell you the point where it crosses the x-axis. And here my calculator told me the 0, the x-intercept, is this point, -5.9, I'll round to the nearest tenth, comma 0. So that's the first point where the graph crosses the x-axis. The x-intercepts are called the zeros. But now we have to repeat the process to find the other point where it crosses the x-axis. So we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to have to move the cursor to where it crosses the x-axis and then give it a left bound and a right bound for it to look for it. So I'm going to go on my calculator second and then trace for calculate. Choose option 2 for 0. See, my calculator is now asking for a left bound, but I'm trying to find this other x-intercept. So I'm just going to move my cursor to the right using the right arrow to about here, a point that's to the left of where it crosses the x-axis. So my cursor is about here. I'm trying to find this point down here. That's definitely to the left of where it crosses the x-axis. So for left bound, I'm going to press enter. Now my calculator is asking for a right bound. So I'm going to use the right arrow button to move the cursor past where it crosses the x-axis, any place to the right of it, because again, I want to tell my calculator, look in between the left bound and the right bound. Look in that area for where it crosses the x-axis. So I'm going to press to the right until my cursor gets past where it crosses the x-axis, and I'm going to press enter. Now you see I have my left bound and right bound. So my calculator is looking in this area for where it crosses the x-axis, which is right here. And now for guess, I'm just going to press to the left a little bit until my cursor gets close to where it touches the x-axis. You see how my cursor now is about where it crosses the x-axis over here. So when it says guess, I'll just press enter. And here, my other x-intercept, my other 0, is the point 0.4, 0. So that's how you find x-intercepts. That's how you find zeros. You might have to rewind and listen to that again, but all you're basically doing is you're telling your calculator, look in between these two values. Look in this range for where the graph crosses the x-axis. You have to give it a left bound and a right bound and then a guess.